Welcome to Chapter 14. Chapter 14 has to do with material requirements planning. Or MRP for short. And we're going to talk about ERP, which is Enterprise Resource Planning. So in this particular case, we have to deal with, or the learning objectives are, developing a product structure tree, as it's sometimes called, or simply identifying the product structure, build a gross requirements plan, a net requirements plan, and we talked about in chapter number 12 about EOQ, lot for lot, and POQ, which is production order quantity. Now, dependent demand. Independent demand is something you would have dealt with in the forecasting chapter. So you would forecast the number of F-150 trucks that you would sell, but the dependent demand, you don't forecast the number of tires if you're Ford. If each truck has 4 full-size tires, you take the number of trucks that you expect to sell and you multiply by 4. It's simply a calculation. Now, if you're one of the manufacturers who makes tires, if it's your finished goods, you will forecast how many tires you're going to sell. So you have to know what the final product is. The only thing that is forecast. All of the components. So let's say you have a smartwatch. All of the components that go into making that smartwatch, the band, the crystal, all the components, you would not forecast that. You would say, how many smartwatches are we going to sell? So the smartwatch itself is independent. All of the components, which are done with a bill of materials or BOM, it's just a calculation. So number of trucks times the number of tires, full-size tires. Number of trucks, the number of lights that go in it. All of those types of things. So it allows you to get product done faster to market changes and improves utilization of your facilities and your labor, and hopefully reduce inventory levels. And it helps us in point number 3 to schedule. And in point number 2, to determine the quantity that we need to order. You need the master production schedule. You need the BOM, the BOM. That's what it's called. Not politically correct anymore. But the bill of materials, inventory availability, which is just how much inventory you have on, standing orders or planned orders, and then the lead times. How long from when you between when you need it, how far in advance do you need to order it? Master production schedule comes from the aggregate production plan. So you've done forecasting, you've done aggregate planning or aggregate scheduling if you've done chapter 13, and then you have trying to get into more and more levels of detail. And so the master production schedule is fixed or frozen in the near term. And so that means it doesn't change. You can't be constantly changing it like every day, every hour at the end of each day. You need to fix it for a certain period of time so that you can get the people, the equipment, and the materials. In this particular case, we are focused mainly on materials. If you took the chapter on scheduling, that was more on people and when jobs were to be aligned. This is about how many of component A, B, C, etc. And it's a rolling schedule. What that means is if it's the first week of September, that's your schedule. And then it becomes the second week of September, the third week. And so it rolls forward. And you will do a forecast or with your master production schedule. Sorry, it's not really a forecast. It's a calculation. It's called a planning horizon. And it depends on the company, how far in the future you set your plans. A lot of it has to do with lead times. So you can see that in this particular case, from the aggregate production plan, you've got the January and the February sales. Now, in this particular case, you're now breaking it down by, in this case, week. So you can see the 240 watt amplifier, 1, 3, 5, and 7. So every 2 weeks, you make 100 of them. Of the 150, you make 500, 500, 450, 450. And then the 75 in week 3, you make 300. And then 4 weeks later, you make 100. So that becomes the master production schedule. So the aggregate plan just says we're going to have 1,500 speakers in January, but now the master production schedule, so the aggregate plan says the number of speakers. The master production schedule says the type of speaker, 240, 150, or 75. Now, you need, you can make these make to order, you can assemble it, or you can stock. So in this particular case, you have the scheduled orders, the production or the process focus, the repetitive focus, and the product focus. If you took information in a previous chapter, you would understand about each one of the types. It doesn't have mass customization on here, although that is a version of make to order. And I'm not going to go into detail because that's not what this chapter is about process focus, repetitive, and product. You can refer to the previous chapter that we took in the book. That's part of your course. So in this particular case, you can see the gross requirements for, in this case, crab meat, quiche, and spinach quiche. And so you have, in the various periods, we'll assume that they're weeks, 50, 100, 47, 60, etc. for the crab meat, and 100, 250, 150. That means, and these are for the ending product, all right? This is for the final good, like on the previous screen or so, or 2 screens ago, I guess it was 240, 150, and 75 amps or watts. So the bill of materials is the list of all the components, ingredients, and materials to make one item. So then you can just multiply. If anybody is into genealogy, which has to do with family histories and things, you'll be quite familiar with how this works. And the items at the higher levels are considered to be parents, and the lower level is a child. And just like your parents are somebody's child, your grandparents will look at your parents differently because they were their kids. And you one day may be a parent of yourself if you aren't already. And one day your children may have children's. All right. And yeah, that's a scary thought, right? So here's an example. You start off with a low-level coding. This is important. Low-level code 0 only has one item, the finished product. In this case, the awesome speaker kit. All right. Now, at low-level code 1, the way you read it is, it takes 2 B's to make 1 A. That's what the 2 in the bracket stands for. 2 B's to make 1 A. It takes 3 C's to make 1 A. So if you need to make 100 A's, you need 200 B's. And you need 300 C's. And I'll show you in the software how it calculates it. And there's an upcoming slide that shows you how to do it by hand. Also, in this diagram, at low-level code 2, so E is a child of B. E is also a child of C. So it takes 2 E's to make 1 B. It takes 2 E's to make 1 C. It takes 2 F's to make 1 C. Low-level code 3. D is a child of B, and D is a child of F. The reason why it's dropped down to low-level code 3 is you want all the D's on the same line. You do not want some D's at level 2, 3, and 7, for example. So as you notice, all the E's are at level 2. You don't have to look up. You don't have to look down at the product structure tree or the bill of materials. And you can just see all the E's are at the same level. All the D's are at the same level. All the G's are at the same level. So in that particular case, that's why it's dropped down. Now you have to be careful when you use the software. It doesn't quite do it that way, but I'll show you some examples when I show you the lectures on this. So here's what I was talking about. We want to make 50. So you want 50 A's. So 50 times 2 is 100. You can see the math. And then, of course, the C that was on the right, it takes 3 C's to make 1 A. So it takes 150 C's to make 150. So you just multiply all the way down. And when they're in multiple branches, you just have to add them together. Like E is in multiple branches, as is part D. So it takes 2 D's to make 1 B. And you need 100 B's, so you need 200 D's for that branch. You have 2 times the 300 because of the F's. So I'm going to go back a screen. So if you just look it down here, one of the easiest ways, I find it easier to do it this way, 50 A's, how many D's? 50 A's times 2 times 2. So that would be 200 on the left. So 50 times B, which is 2, and D, which is 2, is 200. How many D's on the right? 50 times 3 times 2 times 2. So that would be 600. So 3 times 2 is 6, times 2 is 12, and that times 50 is 600. You add the 200 and the 600, and you get 800 D's. So when I look at the screen, especially if you get it on a test, just multiply the numbers all the way down. The way they show it in this solution is they show it line by line, all right, low-level code by low-level code. I prefer when I present it, normally, I just multiply through. Start at the top, multiply all the way down. And then if they're in multiple branches, you do have to add them together. Whichever way works for you. But the software will calculate that for you. Modular bills of material are not final products, but what happens is, I'm sure you can imagine if you have like a car, the bill of materials would be massive. So what they do is they kind of group it together. Let's say the engine, all the components to build an engine. And then on the bill of materials, they'll say one engine of this type, you know, the 347 XB engine. Well, on that, that is not a final good because you don't sell the engine by itself. But what you do is you build the engine and you have all the components, because otherwise it is just mind-boggling, literally, where you would have this massive product structure tree and bill of materials. There'd be so many things. It would be difficult for somebody to truly understand it. All right. This is done to the final point to make kits. So what you might have is a kit which would be, say, you know, four bolts and 4 nuts, and a couple of little plastic things that you put on the ends of the bolts, whatever the case would be, washers perhaps. All right, and you would just call that, and that would be a kit. So when you buy something and they're in the little plastic bags normally, that would be a kit, and you wouldn't have that. You would just have that as a, and they call it a planning bill. All right, phantom bills, the best example is when you're doing cross-stocking. What happens is, in this particular case, the items they do not go physically into inventory. If you remember cross-stocking, the item arrives at the loading dock, and then is immediately put on another truck. You don't go and put it onto your warehousing shelf. You simply take the items out and you expedite it and you put it in another truck so it goes out the door quite quickly. But it needs to physically go into inventory. All right? That would be an example. And so they're only temporary. They're called phantom bills. They're just a temporary type of thing. There's various other versions of it. But that's, to me, an example that I can understand, and hopefully you can too. And again, sub-assemblies that only exist temporarily, and they never go into inventory. Sometimes they get consumed in the process, like a chemical or things along this line. Low-level coding, I've talked about. It is very important. The top item is low-level code 0. You would have, for finished good, you would only have one item, the amps, the amp speaker system that we were talking about. And then each level goes down. So 1 is a child of 0. 2 is a child of 1. 3 is a child of 2. And remember, you go all the way down. So if there's a D, you go to the lowest. Although I'll show you on the software, it doesn't quite do it that way. Lead times, basically the difference between when you order it and you receive it. So when you order off something online, it will usually give you a rough idea when the product will arrive, how long it's going to take, depending on where it's coming from. Because some of the products you order online are literally coming from China, and they can take 6 or 8 weeks, and with the pandemic, they're even taking longer. Time phase diagram. What you do is you put, and I've always viewed this as turning the bill of materials on its side and applying time. So item A takes a week. You need it for week 8. So you need B and C at the start of, or the end of week 7. Sorry, the start of week 7. And so B takes 2 weeks to produce. So if you need it for week 7, you need to order it or make it in week 5. C only takes a week. So you can start E and F at week 6. E takes 2 weeks, so you go back from 6 to 4, so you just subtract. So where would you use this? If you were a purchasing agent or a buyer, in week 0, what do you have to do? Nothing. There's nothing that needs to be done. Or if you're manufacturing it, do you need to start making any of these? No. What happens in week 2? You need to start to make some G's. Sorry, I said week 2. I apologize. Week 1. In week 1, you need to start making some G's. What happens in week 2? You need to start making some D's. In week 3, the G's and D's get combined to start making some F's. You also need to start making some E's. Again, if you order them externally, you would just be a purchase order. If you make them internally, it'd be a production order. What happens in week 4? You need to start making production of D, as you can see at the top. And you also need to start making E. F is WIP, and so is E, because it's partially done. What happens in week 5? D and E are completed, so they can start producing B. And E and F are still in work in progress. In week 6, E and F finish, so you can start with the C's, and then in week 7, the B's and C's are done, so you can start assembling them together to make the A's. So you read it from left to right. And you back, but when you create it, you actually start from right to left. You start with the A, back it up. So you turn the product structure tree that we saw before in the bill of materials, you turn it on its side, and you start putting time to it. So it's called a time phase diagram. All right, so we want to make 50 units of A in week 8. All right, this is all the calculations, and this might become a lot more clear when you see an exact example from your book. All right, now it uses some terminology at the top in the very first bullet point that is called explosion. So you have to watch in today's world. Yes, you explode the bomb. Not politically correct anymore. I wouldn't be wanting to walk through the airport talking on my cell phone and say, yeah, have you exploded the bomb yet? Yeah, no, that's a bad thing, okay? So you just have to watch the terminology perhaps a little bit. But that's what it's commonly called. You know, they may have been trying to expand the bill, expand it, but it's very often it's referred to as exploding the bomb, the BOM. All right. So here's what it looks like with numbers and the weeks. All right, for the gross requirements plan. We'll do this when we do a complete MRP record. You can see this is the MRP record. I'll go from left to right. L for L, or lot for lot, means that if you need 17, you only order 17 or make 17. If you need 31, you order 31. There are certain things that when you go to the store, if you went to the store and you wanted 17 bananas, you can go and buy 17 bananas. The lead time is 1 week. So in other words, from when you order it or start making it till it's completed is 1 week. Currently you have 10 on hand. You can see the safety stock and the allocated are 0. The low level code is 0, which means that it is the parent, and it is identified as part number A or letter A. You need 50 in week 8, sorry. Now, in week 8, you need 50. But good news, you already have 10. So you only need to make 50, because your goal would be, unless you have a safety stock of 10, you would like to use up the inventory you currently have. So the net requirements is what would happen if you didn't do anything. So even though it's written as a positive, it's actually would be like negative inventory. The planned order receipts are where you apply the lot rule. So for example, in this particular case, you need 40, you order 40. But let's just say that you had to order them in dozens, in 12s. Well, you would have 12, 24, 36, and 48, at least in North America. That's why we do dozens. And so in that particular case, 36 is not enough. You'd have to make 38. Just like when you go to the store and buy eggs. You usually buy eggs sometimes in 6s, 12s, 18s, and maybe 24s, depending on where you go. So that's where you apply the lot sizing rule. You can see that in the planned order receipts, that's when you need it. You need 40 in week 8. When do you need to order it? Which is the planned order releases. There's a lead time of 1 week. So you back it up from 8 to 7. Fine. B, if you remember from our tree, it takes 2 B's to make 1 A. So you take the 40, that's in the planned order releases for week 7, you multiply by 2 and you get 80, and then you go through the same process. C, it takes 3 C's to make 1 A. So in week 7 for C, you need 120. And then again, you go through the rest. A scheduled receipt, by the way, is something that is already on order. Something you ordered in week 0 or -1 or -2. It's things that you've ordered in the past. So if you're sitting at home right now listening to this, and you ordered something online a week or 2 ago, and it's still not here yet, but you don't have to order it again, it's going to arrive next week, then that would be an example of a planned or a scheduled receipt. So and sometimes there are also standing orders. There are some companies who will just order a certain amount every week. If any of you, might have had certain products, it's already been ordered. You don't have to order it again. And here's the rest of them. All right. And I'll show you how to do this on the software. Unfortunately, all of them are lot for lot, but I'll show you some examples, even if I modify the examples out of the book. So it's not all lot for lot. All right. Net requirements, it shows you the math. I mentioned how you get the net requirements. Okay, you can see that the net requirements are the gross requirements minus the on-hand inventory. And this just goes through the math. I'll let you read this at your leisure. And I'll show you them again in the examples from the book. All right. This is just, again, showing you the calculations, where they come from. And once again, we're going to use the software. It's a little more advanced, so I'll take my time when I show you the examples, how all of these calculations are done for you. And it fills out your MRP records. So here's the logic, okay, to get the net requirements. So the on hand is inventory you already have. The scheduled receipts are inventory that's coming in. You're not going to have, honestly, any examples where there's going to be allocations. All right. Safety stock, we took in chapter 12 on inventory. It's trying to minimize your the chances of you running out of product. Lot sizing, lot for lot is 1 for 1. Economic order quantity, again, was in chapter 12 on inventory. Partial period balancing, we're not going to really do, but I left it in. All right, and this Wagner-Witten algorithm is, again, something that we don't deal with in an introductory course in materials management. All right, so we use lot for lot a lot of times when we use just in time, because you don't want, what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep inventory to a minimum. And you can see it's not recalculated every time, even though quote it should be, because they call it system nervousness, which means you're changing things so frequently that you sort of never get anything done. Just think about it this way. It's equivalent to this. You're not sure what you're going to do this evening. Well, I could do this. Oh, and then a couple minutes later, no, I could do that. Oh, and then like you just wind up doing nothing. All right. So this is, again, just a summary of the lot sizing techniques. And in an earlier chapter, we took capacity planning, and you would use that before you do your MRP records to see if you can actually do this or not. ERP is a very big system. It's very expensive, and it basically runs your entire company. At the schools I teach for in Calgary, they all use, and the students, you don't necessarily see this very much, but it's called Banner. And it runs things like registering for courses, grades, like the official grades, which is linked into your learning management system, depending on which school you're at. D2L, Blackboard are two common ones. And in industry, SAP is the dominant ERP system. Very rarely will you know everything about SAP. It's a massive, it's way bigger than Microsoft Office. And in this particular case, like if you're a purchasing agent, you'll know how to make purchase orders on SAP. If you're a production person, you'll know that area. And so what it is, it's just a software system that runs your entire organization. It's incredibly complex. It's incredibly expensive. We're talking millions of dollars here. And like I said, very rarely will there be anybody, or there'll only be a handful of people in your large organization who understands how it all operates. Okay. So disadvantages, very expensive, and very expensive to train people, right? Point number 3, it's so complex that many companies can just not adjust. Some companies have tried to do it, and it just overwhelms them. The people can't handle the new system. It's so expensive. There's companies out there who also do products like visual manufacturing, but SAP is by far and away the most common. By the way, we did talk to industry, and they said they don't want us to train you in SAP. They will do that. They just want you to know what an ERP system is. Okay. And basically, it's a software system that runs your entire company. Accounting, production, scheduling, you name it. And that's the end of chapter 14.